Hello everyone, and welcome to this quick tutorial from BlenderCookie.com. My name is Jonathan Williamson, and today we're going to dive into a little bit more Python. So first of all, a prerequisite, if you are not familiar with Python and or haven't seen my previous Python tutorials on creating a custom menu and a couple of other things, I do encourage you to go ahead and check out those tutorials first, as this one is going to assume a little bit of familiarity with Python in Blender. So check out those previous tutorials. They are linked to in the description. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can find them just below the video, and of course if you're here on Blender Cookie, then you can see them just in the regular description to check those out. So what we're going to do in this tutorial though is we're going to create a custom toolbar panel. So in the previous ones we looked at how to create things like a custom menu that then we could call with a hotkey. Well, this time I want to look at creating a custom panel within here. So a panel is each one of these. So where we see object tools, rigid body tools, 3D navigation, which is powered by an add-on, the KD tools, which also is powered by an add-on. Each one of these are panels, and we can create custom panels here or here or here, anywhere that we want basically within Blender's interface. So we're going to go ahead and create one in the toolbar. Before we actually create a panel though, let's check out the basic structure using the built-in templates included with Blender. So if we just go down to the templates menu, notice that I'm in the text editor. So I've got my viewport or my workspace split into a few things. I've got my info panel up here as normal. I've got my text editor, got a 3D view just so I can check out the toolbar. I've got my properties bar, and then I've got the Python console down here at the bottom for testing anything that I want. So going back to the templates menu, let's just choose Python. And if we just look at UI panel simple, this will be the simplest one to do. We can just load that right up and check it out. So we can see import BPY. This is normal because we're importing the Blender Python API. We've got a class, which is actually defining the panel. You can see that the type is panel. We've got the information about the panel, such as the tooltip, the label, the ID name, so Blender can find it, showing where it's at. It's set the space type to properties, which is this over here. Space type refers to each one of these. Then we've got the region type, which is window, and the context is object. We've got an actual draw function that is actually creating all the different elements within that panel. So for example, here inside the object tools, you might have a row, let's see, here we go, like a row.operator for translate, rotate, scale, one for origin, etc., etc. You'd have things like a label, which is right here. Row.label would be things like your object or keyframes or motion paths. And then you've got the regular register functions along with the if name function in order to allow you to run the script without having to load it as an add-on. So that, of course, was a really quick breeze through the script. We're going to take it a little bit slower as we go through and code our own. But basically, this is the structure that we're going to look at. And if you didn't follow everything I said, if you don't understand what the draw function is or the class, that's okay, because we're going to be starting completely from scratch. And so let's go ahead and do that. Just remember that while we're writing our own, we're going to basically be mimicking this. So if you ever need to bounce back and look at a real example of something that is guaranteed to work, let's just say perhaps I make an error while I'm writing mine and I don't catch it, and then you're wondering why your script isn't working, you can always bounce back to this one and see exactly how it should be formatted. Now, by the end of this course, we're going to have a script that is completely working and whatnot, but let's just, set that aside as a precaution. So let's start by creating a new text file. So we're going to go to text, we'll create text block, and let's just go ahead and name this as custom panel.py. We don't need to actually save it anywhere. We certainly could, and that would be a good idea, once we get further along. But for now, let's just get started. The first thing that we want to do, as with any script in Blender, is to import the BPY. So again, that's importing the Blender Python. And the second thing is we want to define our class. Remember that the class is what's actually going to define the panel. It's what gives our panel the name, where we can set what's actually in the panel, all that kind of thing. So this is going to be class, and we'll call it custom panel, staying consistent with our file naming convention and things like that. And within parentheses then, we want to put in bpy.types.capital P panel. So this is going to tell Blender that we're actually creating a subclass of the panel class that's predefined in the API. And so this allows us to basically just tell Blender that the following code is adhering to these specific rules and things like that, and probably more things that are over my head, but this is what we're doing. So the next step is to go ahead and give ourselves a tooltip such that when you hover over it, or if you were to run this as, if you're creating an operator or something like that, we want to give a description to our panel. So we can type in triple quotes. So this basically pulls up as a comment, essentially. We're going to put in, just say, a custom panel in the viewport toolbar. We'll be fine. And then we're going to close it with 3 quotes and move on to the next line. Now, we don't need to put in everything here. There's a lot of other things that you can put in for BL label, space type, region type, context, etc., etc. If you check out the Blender API reference, which, by the way, I do recommend you browse through, you just go to help and go to Python API reference. Then you can, if you search for specific things, like if you search for bpy.types.panel, then you can read more about the actual panel subclass. You can read about the attributes that you can put along with that, etc., etc. In this case, we're going to put in a label. So this will be BL_label, and we'll put it equal to, we'll just do custom panel. So this is basically the name of our panel. And then the space type, and this is what tells Blender basically where to put the panel, is going to be, it's space_type, and it's going to equal the 3D viewport, which when looking at basically the identifier for the 3D viewport is view_3D in all caps. And next, we've got our region type. So within the view 3D, there's 2 different places that you can put a panel. So in the viewport here, we've got the toolbar and we have the properties panel. So now that we've defined that our panel is going to be created in the 3D viewport, we need to tell it where at in the 3D viewport. So in this case, it's going to be BL_region, if I can type, region_type equals tools, like this. Now, you can always find all of these if you kind of dig around a little bit. You do have to dig through here a bit. Personally, I found it's easiest to just look through the API. If you look for BL_region_type, then you can find all the different options available here, as the possibilities that you can include. The other easy thing to do, if you ever aren't quite sure, if you simply just choose any one of these. So basically, we know that we want to put our panel here, but maybe we don't know what the actual identifier for the region type is. If you just right-click on basically any menu or any button or menu within anywhere in Blender's interface, basically, you can just right-click, choose Edit Source. That will load up the Python file that actually defines that menu, and it'll also put the cursor on that line. So in this case, I right-clicked on Translate. You can see col for column.operator, transform.translate. And if we look up here, we can see BL context is object mode. The label is object tools. Now, it doesn't tell us the region type, but I believe that's because it's already pulling in some other attributes from an additional class, which is then defining where all these are going. But you can kind of dig around through these a bit and start to kind of see how other people are doing it. For example, if you load up KD Tools, and KD Tools is one of Kent Trammell's add-ons, you can click Edit Source, and then you can start to see he's got the space type, again, is View 3D, region type is Tools. So by looking at other people's code, you can start to get an idea of kind of what's going on. Other things you can do is definitely be checking out all of the Python templates. There's a bunch of them in here, and they're all really, really useful. So, looking at the UI list, UI menu simple, panel, etc. So earlier we looked at the panel simple. If we look at the UI panel, it's got a lot more details. In this case, you can see we've got space type, region type, context, and a much more complex panel that is then using some additional layouts. And in fact, let's go ahead and run these. So if we go back to our panel simple, just to see what it does. Number one, if we look at our space type, we can see that it says properties. So we know that it's going to pop up over here. We know that the region type is window and that the context is object. So this doesn't quite tell, we don't necessarily know what region type means or window means, but it says creates a panel in the object properties window. So if we just press Alt-P and run this, we don't see anything has changed. It doesn't look like anything's here. But if we select, say, an object like this, go to the object properties, scroll down, we can see our new panel. Because remember, it said creates a panel in the object properties window. So this is the properties region, this is the properties space type. The region type is window, so I assume that refers to one of these. And then the context is object. So it would be this one here. So we can see hello world, active object is lamp, the name is lamp, and we could go ahead and add a cube. So these are all the operators that have been defined through this panel. So if we go back to our panel, which was the custom, oops, I've got a few extra ones in here, you can just kind of ignore those. We were ready to go ahead and move on. So we understand now that we've got our space type is the view 3D, we have the region type is tools, and the next thing that we need to do is create our draw function. So the draw function is what's actually going to create the actual panel. So this is just def for function, or def draw, and in this case we're always going to do parentheses self, comma, context, in parentheses, and a colon, and then hit enter to go to the new line. And anything within the draw function now is where we can start putting in things like labels, we can put in buttons, menus, etc., etc. So let's start by first making something simpler, and that is defining the layout. So normally what you would do if you wanted to say put in a label, you would do, let's see, it would be self.layout.row.label, and then within this here you would put in text equals this is my panel, whoops, and that should be in quotes like this, and then closing parentheses. So that gets really, really long. So instead what you can do is you can first do layout equals self.layout. So now we can get rid of the self because I've just defined a variable layout, which equals self.layout. So now when I call it layout, it's actually calling this, or the self.layout. And then the same thing, we can also put in row equals layout.row, such that if I wanted to put in a label, I can simply say row.label equals this. And actually what that's doing is it's first calling my row variable, which is actually layout.row, which layout in turn is calling my layout variable for self.layout. So then that just makes it a lot simpler to go and put in all these. You know, it may seem a little complex initially while we only have one item, but once we start putting in 20, 30, however many items we have, you don't want to put in, you know, self.layout.row.label every single time. Okay, now we can't yet see our panel. So before we get on to actually putting in any functions or anything, or any buttons, menus, or anything like that, let's go ahead and activate our panel such that we can see it. If you were just to click Alt-P right now, let me just close all of these. If you just press Alt-P, you're not going to see anything. You know, it ran the script, but you can't see anything. We've told it to run in the region, or in the correct region and space, but we haven't actually registered the script yet. So what we need to do is we're going to go down here and we first need to define our register function. So this is going to be def, whoops, got my caps lock on, def register. And if you did my previous Python tutorials, which again, I encourage you to do those first if you haven't already done them, you'll remember that this is basically a function that we're going to include with basically every script that we do if we define a custom class or anything like that. And we just need to basically tell Blender that this class exists. So it's going to be def register, open and closing parentheses, followed by a colon, and then it's going to be BPY for Blender Python, utils for utilities, dot register underscore class, and then in parentheses, the exact name of the class as defined here. So this is custom panel, clothing parentheses, and then new line, hit Shift Tab to unindent, and now we want to unregister this. So what's going to happen is when we run the script, Blender is going to register this, and then when we close Blender or do anything like that, it's going to unregister this. So that way we don't have these custom classes just lingering around. Now, it's not necessarily going to happen when you close Blender. I believe that just when you close Blender, it just removes the cache or whatnot, so it doesn't really matter. But if you're running this as an add-on, if you uncheck the add-on to turn it off, then you don't want your classes lingering around. And so this is where the unregister function comes in. So in this case, we're going to do def unregister like this, and it'll be bpy.utils.unregister class custom panel. And then in order to actually run this just as a general script so that we don't have to load it as an add-on, since that can be a little bit of a hassle while we're just testing, we're also going to include if underscore name equals underscore underscore main like this, whoops, with a colon, then we're going to register. So this basically just says that if this script is running by itself, and I'm not going to get into the specific details because I always get a little bit murky on this. This is a great question for the Stack Overflow for asking a general Python question. You can find lots of documentation on exactly what this does and understanding it why in very simple layman's terms. But regardless, what it does is if you're running it just as a simple script, then it's going to register your class such that you can see it. So, assuming we haven't made any mistakes, let's just press Alt-P, and there we go. Our panel has showed up. Now, our panel doesn't have anything yet. We should have text, although our text is not working. So let's double check to see what we did. So we've got layout equals self.layout. We've got row equals layout.row, and here's the problem. So if you look at another example, let's just go back to our simple panel. We can see row equals layout.row needs to have a parentheses on it. So let's just go ahead and fix that real quick. So we just go back to custom panel, row, parentheses, Alt-P and run it, and now we have our text. So this is my panel, and why don't we just make this text a little bit better? This is my panel full of awesome tools. Like that. And there we go. Now it's gotten a little bit long, but that's okay. It's just for demonstration purposes. So now let's make this a little bit more interesting though, and let's actually put a button in here. So oftentimes, if you're creating a custom panel, you're creating these in order to improve your workflow. So you might be creating these in order to give you quick access to a lot of tools. You maybe have created some custom tools. Whatever it may be, you want to have your stuff in here. So in this case, we're going to keep it simple, and we're just going to assume that we want easy access to add a cube, because a cube is something that we use a lot. So let's just put in a button to add a cube. Well, how do we know how to put in that button? Well, the first thing to do is let's just look at an example. So we'll go back to the UI panel simple, and we can see this one here, row.operator, and check it out. That's even our primitive cube. Cool. Well, just to make this a little bit more interesting, let's assume we're not going to use a cube. Let's assume we're going to use a plane. So we know that we have row.operator, so that's fantastic. But how do we know what the plane is? Well, let's go back to the custom panel, and let's start by just putting in row.operator. And then within our parentheses, it's going to be quote, and then it'll be the name of the operator. We don't know what that operator is, so let's find out. This is where the info panel comes in. And note that the info panel here, all it is, it's your main toolbar within this just pulled down. So this is kind of a hidden section within Blender. If you don't have it, literally just go up here, grab over the bar and pull down. And there you go. So what this does is it shows the Python path for any commands that you run. So for example, if I select my cube, hit X and delete, you can see bpy.ops for operator.object.delete use global equals false. So if you wanted to put in an operator here to say have a button that says delete the current selection, this is what you would use basically. But in this case, we want to insert a plane. So let's just hit Shift A, add a mesh and a plane. And you can see bpy.ops.mesh.primitive_plane_add. And then inside parentheses, we've got lots of different options. Now, we can just ignore all of these options for now. These are just a whole bunch of different options that are available to a plane, such as basically it's all of this stuff. But we're just going to ignore those because if we leave them out, it goes to the default, which is this. So we're going to put in, we can ignore the ops because this is what operator is telling us basically. And so we're going to put in mesh.primitive _plane_add in quotes and in parentheses. And if we hit Alt-P, there we go. We now have a button for add plane. Now you might have a slight problem. Let's first just delete this just to check that it works. This is my panel full of something and we can click add plane. Cool, so it works. But how do we get rid of this? Since we've got our cool label here and we like our label, we would like this to just show up below here. Well, the way that we do this is using this row equals layout.row. So basically each time you put in this line right here, what that does is basically tells Blender to put anything below it onto a new line. So doing row equals layout.row like this, hit Alt-P, and it'll put it on a new line. So now I've got this panel is full of awesome tools, and I can click add plane, and it works all fine and dandy. Cool, let's put in another one. Note that this says mesh.primitive underscore plane underscore add. That seems a little bit long. Maybe it could just be mesh.add plane, but this is like this because we have a lot of primitives. So for example, I could put in row.operator mesh.primitive underscore torus add. I think that's the name of it. Hit Alt-P, and now I have a torus, and it works all fine and dandy like. Very, very cool. Well, what if again we wanted this on a new line? Well, then you would put in row equals layout dot row, Alt-P, and there you go. But you may have noticed that some of these are stacked together. So, it might be nice if we've got each one of these. So these are similar objects. But what if we then had another one? Maybe we have a section for adding objects, and then we have a section for deleting objects. We would want these connected like this, and then we want the next section to have the next ones. So in this case, what we're going to do is we don't want to use a row, because a row is exactly what it sounds like. It's a row. So what we want to use are columns. So the way that we can do this is, first of all, let's put it below our text, because we want our text to be on a row, just like this. So to do the columns, we're going to do two things. First, we're going to do split equals layout dot split. And then we can get rid of our row like this. And then we're also going to put in col for column equals split dot column like this. And then replace the row with col like this. And if we hit Alt-P, probably nothing's changed because we've only got one. So this is just going to look normal. But if we remove this row like this, and we remove this, replace it with col, and we can bring this onto a new line like that, hit Alt-P, and now they're sort of connected. They're much closer together. So what's different? Well, right now they're not aligned. So there's another option in here that if we put inside the parentheses here, if we set align equals true, and again, one of the best ways to learn all of these little things, since it's kind of hard to figure all these out, is again, look at other people's code. If we now hit Alt-P, you notice that they touch. And so going back to looking at other people's code, if you go into the UI panel, and let's just press Alt-P, and it says creates a panel in the scene context of the properties editor. So if we go in here into the property or in the scene properties and check it out, we can see here's the layout demo. We've got a simple row, an aligned row, column 1, column 2, this one being aligned, this one is not. We have a big button, and then we have buttons of different sizes. So if you go in and start looking at this code, suddenly you can see there's a lot of different things that you can do. So like with this one, we've got two row properties that are on the same row, and so they show up just like this. Then we have below that an aligned row, so they show up next to each other, but they're touching. Then we have a column, in this case, this one, in frame and start frame, followed by the second column, but this column again is aligned. And so you can start to see how there's a lot of different things that you can do in order to customize the way that this shows up. And let's look at one more thing that's not listed in here, but that we can do further. So if we wanted to, say, change the name of this, maybe add plane and add torus is a little bit extraneous. Maybe if our label says instead add objects. So if this says add objects, when we hit Alt-P, then having add plane and add torus is a little bit redundant. So if we wanted to change the text, you can simply put in a comma, set text equals plane, Alt-P, and now it'll change the name of that button. So then we can do the same thing. So comma, text equals torus, Alt-P, and there you go. So add objects, plane, and torus. Fantastic. Well, what if you now, we can bring our panel back. It's a little long now. What if you wanted to, say, add an icon to these? Because you notice that if we hit Shift-A, we've got all these beautiful icons to the side here that helps you really visually immediately see, without reading any of the text, exactly what kind of object you're going to be adding here. So what we can do is, just like we can do text, we can also do icon. So if we do comma, icon equals, well, we don't know what it equals. So how do we find that? Well, there's one way. We could do Shift-A, right-click, and choose, well, we don't have an edit source. This is one downside to some of the menus, is that we don't have these. However, there's a very nifty little add-on included with Blender. If you go to add-ons and just search icon, you can see under development, there's an icons option. And what this does is it puts a icon browser in the text editor specifically for this reason. So if we bring up our view and we just show the properties and we scroll down, we now have an icon section. If we expand this, we can see all of the icons available within Blender. So here are our add object ones. And in this case, we want our torus, or we'll do the plane first. And the cool thing is if we just left click on the icon, look up here, icon ID equals mesh_plane, it has automatically not only shown us that ID, it's also copied it to our clipboard. So now I can just put in icon equals paste, Alt P, and there we go. So now we'll do that one more time. So this time we can probably extrapolate and figure out exactly what this will be. So we can set icon equals quote, and I'm just using single quotes for this because this is kind of an ID. And in this case, we'll just do mesh_torus. And I expect that this is going to be the correct one. So let's hit Alt P, and there we go. It works. You know, one of the nice things about all the icons is that they're all named. So if you click on this, it says meta capsule, meta ellipsoid. We've got mesh cone, outliner data lattice, and so all of them are evenly or consistently named. And so once you know the name of one of the ones you're looking for, it's very easy to then find the accompanying ones. So there we have it. That is our simple toolbar panel. We can go ahead and toggle this down. We could maybe change the name here. So maybe this will be add objects, Alt P. And there we go, add objects, at which point this is a little bit redundant. So maybe we would go ahead and just take that out, choose Alt P, or you could maybe say, you know, if you're wanting to get really descriptive, you could just say choose object like this, and there we go. So, you know, perhaps if you'd written a more complicated add-on and you needed to give the user a little bit more feedback to understand kind of what things did, such as, you know, here, transform object keyframes, helps kind of tell the viewer, even though, you know, we as experienced users know that translate, rotate, and scale are object-based tools, knowing that it's a transform tool helps kind of describe that a little bit more to the viewer, particularly if you're a new viewer or new user. So there you have it. That's creating a custom toolbar panel inside Blender using Python. You know, now would be a good time to go ahead and save the file. I will include this script along with the actual video in the description. So if you're on YouTube, be sure to go ahead and switch over to blendercookie.com, and there's the link to it in the description, and you can see the actual final text that you can see here, along with then the links to the other scripting tutorials that I encourage you to check out before this one or after this one if you're feeling inspired. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.